conversations, and as we continue to see Tea Party advocates, NRA advocates up here continuing to lobby and protest, we understand that the battle is still ongoing, that we cannot let up as it relates to this law, because just because it's law doesn't mean it has to stay the type of law that we passed originally. It'll get one right after the other. We'll have amendments on top of amendments on top of amendments that will be coming through my committee, the codes, and we'll go through this parallel committee in the Senate. And if we're not careful, we'll wind up with something that will be totally different than what we started out with. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Senator, for allowing me to be president and part of this panel discussion as well. That is a very serious in nature. The more that I'm hearing, the more that is, exposing and revealing. And I sat really for the last, talk about the 3 hours of the night that you were working on this. I was up for the last 2 days overnight trying to prepare what I think needed to, be shared here. But hearing and being educated from everyone that's spoken so far is really, it's more frightening than it was when I first looked at it. And one of the things that makes it frightening to me is because as a people of color, as Black people, we have a tendency to not want to deal with the political system. We have a tendency to feel that we're either powerless, it doesn't matter, whatever the different mindsets, whether it's philosophical, ideological, or whatever, we feel that there's no place for us in the process, and we just basically walk away and leave it. This legislation should have had this room filled.
Right.
And the reason why I say that, because even when I know from a very unfamiliar standpoint as I see now, what I did see, one of the angles that I looked at, as Ali was talking about the penalties, for the last 3 years, I was working the ceasefire Chicago model, the SNUF program. And my responsibility was managing that program and managing a team of responders to deal with, trauma incidents when these young people were, shooting each other or whatever the case may be. And, the first thing that stood out when I listened to the governor represent this legislation, and he talked about the volume of the clips and the increased penalties and all the rest of this stuff was, who really has, who does the criminal justice system come into contact with more than anybody else, when you have to make these kind of assessments and decisions. And it's our young people that's on the streets. This is a way that, there's been great success in pulling back the Rockefeller laws, but we know that, the Constitution has continued to keep slavery legal through provision of a crime. And there's always going to be, that system that is in place as long as ignorance prevails amongst the people who is being enslaved by that very machine, that complex. I can point to at least a minimum of at least 6 or 7 people that I know that's in this room, to include myself, and I'm just saying 6, as Dr. Green pointed out, the 50-something young people who were subjected to 600 years. I can point to 6 in this room right now that can go close to that same 500 and 600 years. I served 17 years on a 20-year sentence, and you would think that there was guns and murders and plots and everything else, and it was a federal case. It was one of the preponderance of evidence, kind of a conviction, where there was absolutely no tangible physical evidence involved, just hearsay, which is permissible in federal court. So now you take this kind of legislation and you incorporate that. One of the things that stood out as I was looking at it, it speaks a lot about the intent, or just the thought. We can't say that you were going to shoot someone, but we can say that, there was your intentions. Even to the point of possession. I saw one of the legislation lines that said the attempted possession, and it's still relevant. So who is the real targets? And the NRA and the others that Assemblyman Mosley mentioned that are very vocal about their concerns, they're going to make sure that their concerns are heard. They're going to make sure that their rights are protected. And we have to make sure that not only are the rights protected, but we have to make sure that our children are protected. Because this is the main objective, this is the target. I mean, no matter how you look at it, layer for layer, you know, in my, as you say, the disgustingness of how this all was processed and pushed through is just, you know, frustrating and infuriating, because we had the Newton shooting, you know, we had all the rest of these other shootings that were in suburban communities, and this was all plastered through the news. You know, I mean, they ran clips. They had one clip on all of the news channels that just highlighted a year in, you know, mass murders. And right on the heels of this roll of clips that's beating our community, our loved ones in the head, who are already affected emotionally because their son is either shooting or subject to being shot. You know, they're desensitized to the reality of who the target is, and, you know, ignoring, okay, great, the governor just signed this bill that targets assault rifles. But assault rifles are not shooting down the ones I responded in the hospital to. You know, these are handguns. But they take it and they desensitize the community and they plaster it on the news to make us ignore who the true target of the legislation is. So I close with just saying that we have to definitely talk. We have to communicate more as a people. You know, however many is in this room, whether it's 10, 50, or 250, this conversation can't die here, and our working efforts can't die on this day. We have to continue, and we have to go back and educate the things that you know about and share with your family, with your loved ones, and with your neighbor. You know, don't wait till it's your child that's on the hospital going or in handcuffs before you say, you know, Senator Montgomery and, you know, the panel was right.
Right, I hate to. Let me just say this. I thank you for that, and we want to come back. We're going to stay in here till 3 o'clock. We have the room until 3, so we don't have to leave at 2:30, as the paper says. But I want to hear from the audience. We have a mom here. She's on the other side of the issue. I just want to say that this was a wonderful opportunity taken.
Yes.
To put these pieces in a bill which was so emotionally charged for citizens, but, you know, the real deal was, because you didn't have to do the penalties in that bill as we've done it, so this was an opportunity to do the penalties along with the other thing. And so I want to thank my assemblyman. He really made an excellent point. There may be some amendments, but if we're not part of the amendments, they will be made for the NRA, but they won't be made for us. So that was a good point that he made. Mom, go ahead.
Well, first let me say thank